If I may, let's take a look at the scientific method. I have a very good reason for this, and I'll get to that later, but for now just bear with me. The first step in the scientific method is observation. Concerning your argument, you would make the observation that as an initial sensory experience, we perceive the world as intentional, purposeful, and ordered or designed. The next step in the scientific method would then be to come up with a hypothesis, an explanation as to why this is. Concerning your argument, the hypothesis would be that a God would adequately explain this initial sensory experience, and as a result belief in such a God is in fact the default position. The third step in the scientific method would be to test this hypothesis, and the fourth step would be to present all your data, your observations, your hypothesis, the test you came up with, how you performed it, and everything you observed from your tests, including your concluding thoughts. This all gets presented to your fellow peers, and we'll get to that later. Firstly, I'd like to take a look at your initial observations. As a statement of logical reasoning, you list only that our initial sensory experience. Hereafter I shall use the term perception. Our initial perception of the world is that of intention, purpose, and order or design. Qualify that, if you would please. How can you possibly know what any of our initial perceptions of the world is? You bring up evolutionary theory and mention that a person who might not have studied evolutionary theory as thoroughly to be able to come to the same conclusion as you that design is implied. Do you understand that to have studied evolutionary theory you have already altered your initial perceptions of the world? In studying any theory, scientific or not, you are adding to your perceptions of the world, and even if those theories reinforce your initial perceptions, they are no longer your initial perceptions. An initial perception of the world must be one completely in ignorance of all knowledge and belief. So I suggest instead that we take a look at the world before the Renaissance, before modern knowledge. Granted, such civilizations had beliefs and knowledge of their own, but they lack any understanding of evolution, which you claim allows you the perception of design in the universe. Without evolution, without the idea that we are apes, how did people view the world? It is a persistent idea yet today that we are not animals by those who deny evolutionary theory. It is a safe bet that before evolutionary theory we viewed ourselves as somehow separate from the natural world. We built buildings, we planted the fields, we tamed the wild beasts and kept cattle for food and dogs as pets. Humans imposed order and purpose on nature. So where is the initial view that nature had purpose, intent, and order? Humans invented gods to explain the unexplained, and such gods were regularly considered uncaring and cruel. So where is the initial perception of design, of purpose, intent? In fact, during the Renaissance, as men started to study the world, it was regularly the church that condemned not only their studies, but their conclusions as well. Theistic belief said that studying cadavers was wrong. If it were up to Theists at the time, we wouldn't have the modern medical understanding that we have today. Copernicus was imprisoned by the church, of which he was a cleric, for proclaiming that the earth was not in fact the center of the universe. And of course still today, 150 years after Darwin proposed evolutionary theory, it is regularly Theists who fight against the very ordered concept you would use as reason to believe in a God. Without these concepts that bring an illusion of order, where is the initial perception of order, intent, and purpose? Without this data, we cannot move beyond the observation portion of the scientific method. I will have to leave you to this task. In the meantime, however, let's take a look at the next step of the scientific method, hypothesis. Given the observations, once you finally provide them, you would then offer the explanation that viewing order is most adequately explained by a God. Whether or not such a being exists, he explains the illusion of the initial perception, or so you would claim. Is this accurate? Am I understanding your argument correctly? And as such, belief in a God is only natural and therefore the default position, to which by this reasoning an atheist must convince believers otherwise. First of all, how do you reach this conclusion? What about the appearance of design is best explained by God? What about the appearance of design is not better explained by other, natural, means? Evolution happens by natural selection. Birds have had generations to be selected among those best at flying. How does that not best explain the illusion of design? And secondly, the God conclusion, even if it is reasonably a naturally derived conclusion, is still a conclusion. Take your example of the mirage. Even to an individual, they are presented with data that suggests that there is a body of water in the distance, that data collected by their own senses. They can either accept that the water is there, or they can deny that the water is there. That the body of water is there is a hypothesis, derived from the observation presented by one's senses. Testing that claim would be simple: go to it and try to drink it. Unfortunately, if such a person is not capable of rational thought, they won't recognize the claim, nor even that they should test the claim. Such a person might simply run toward the perceived water, simply accepting that it is there. Such people are easily lost in the desert. A rational person, however, will quickly realize that the location of the perceived water tends to move and remains oddly just at the horizon of their perception. A rational person would have new data to compile given their failed test and can reach a new conclusion, that the perceived water is an illusion, a mirage. The problem with the God conclusion, however, is this: how does one test it? How does one test that God exists and is responsible for what they initially perceive? What's more, Theists regularly claim that it is blasphemy to test God. So even were we to devise a certain test that would put the issue to rest, no doubt some Theists would not only try to stop us, but would condemn us for even considering the test in the first place. Finally, once you are able to provide your observations, and why they lead to your conclusion, are able to devise a test and perform the test, you compile all your data, organize it for clarity, and present it for a peer review. Do you understand why you present this to peer review? If you were able to, using such a process, prove the existence of God, wouldn't you want to present it to the general public? Why do you present your data to peer review first? This is why I presented the scientific process to you, and I want you to listen very carefully. It might do well to take notes. The whole point of the peer review process is to test your own reasoning, to make sure that your observations are complete and properly recorded, to make sure that your hypothesis is reasonably reached and concluded, to make sure that your test is adequate and reasonable, that it can be repeated, and that the same results will be reached again and again, no matter how many times the test is performed. You say that it would be ridiculous to think that our initial experiences or that our reason is not reliable. I say to you, that is the height of arrogance. Questioning your perceptions, questioning your capacity for reason, questioning that your very conclusions might be wrong, is not only the humble thing to do, but the right thing to do. By presenting your findings for peer review, you purposefully challenge people to find flaws in your logic and reason, so that if you are wrong, you are found to be wrong before you make any claim that just might be wrong. And if no one qualified can find anything wrong with your reasoning, then and only then can you present your hypothesis as theory. Yet even still, the peer review process never ends. Even after you present your hypothesis as a theory, your theory will always be tested, and someday new data might be found that shows your conclusions to be wrong. This is why evolutionary theory is just a theory. Even though it has passed peer review for 150 years now, the possibility that it might be wrong remains. This is humility in its purest form, and no humble religion has yet been able to match the achievements of science and reasoned logic. This is also why I cannot accept your argument. It is reasonable to suspect our initial perceptions and reasoning. No matter what conclusion our perceptions lead us to, the default position is never to accept them, but to always test them. Hence, atheism is the default position, and Theists must prove there is a God before they can reasonably expect anyone to accept their claims.